I just assume that a lot of the pushback we got from Wall Street was because of the returns that were to be made in China, right? Put differently, the reason people continued to pour capital into China, even during the pandemic, was basically the same reason John Dillinger robbed banks, because that's where the money is, right? But in digging into this, and particularly if you read Mr. Chanos' testimony, it's not clear to me that this is even a good investment at this point. And I quote Chanos here in saying it's no surprise that Chinese stocks have significantly underperformed relative to U.S. stocks. Since 2010, the S&P 500 Total Return Index has outperformed a China stock ETF by a factor of 8x on a relative basis. On an absolute basis, the China ETF has nearly been cut in half versus the S&P 500 Total Return, increasing over 5x. So even if you put aside the moral concerns that I think the ranking member brilliantly laid out, or the geopolitical concerns, just as like an investment proposition, the risks are mounting up, or the returns aren't there. You can comment on that when I ask a question. The other thing I have to bring up that I've been struck by on this trip, and we've had great discussions and a great tabletop, and this has been very illuminating, but almost everyone we met with a few exceptions, has asked that we keep their identities secret. If you think about it, these are the same people that have no problem going to Hong Kong and Beijing and, you know, dancing with Leo Hud, various conferences, and yet when they meet with members of Congress, it's like we're in some witness protection program and we have to shuttle them around, which I kind of think gets to the, maybe it's related to the Wolf Warrior point, or just we're so sensitive to the reaction. In fact, we had people tell us explicitly that their Chinese LPs would object if they knew they were meeting with us. That kind of crystallizes, I think, the dilemma we face and how difficult it is to mobilize action in light of those concerns. Mr. Clayton, to get a better handle on this problem, you talk about this in your written testimony, but I want you to say it orally. Should Congress mandate that publicly traded companies disclose their exposure to the PRC?
Okay, that I am generally not in favor of issue-specific mandatory disclosure for public companies. I think we often use the securities laws to accomplish other objectives. In this area, I believe that large public companies that have significant exposure to China, for the reasons you just articulated, I would say a greater understanding of the geopolitical risks, the company risks that we've come to learn from COVID. This is an area where I would at least consider a pilot program for very large companies disclosing the China-specific risks and what type of scenario planning they have done in the event of an abrupt decoupling. And look, this is not about liability. It's not about gotcha. It's just about, in the boardroom, if you have a substantial exposure to China, how have you thought about the type of risks that you're talking about if they come to fruition, and provide that information to investors? I think those questions are already being asked. Yeah. But I think that this is an area where you can show leadership. And I would say, you know, look, again, I'm not a big fan of excess liability. I think we have too much of it. But you can show leadership in the type of disclosure, the type of dialogue that companies should be having. I'll just make one last point there. During COVID, this is exactly what we did. We asked public companies to come forward and say, given all the challenges of a lockdown, given all the challenges that, give us your best estimate. Give us your planning as to what you're going to do in response. U.S. public companies did a fabulous job. They told the public, here are our challenges, here are human capital challenges, here are our supply chain challenges, here's what we're going to do about it. And it instilled great confidence in the marketplace.
So what exactly, in your paradigm, would they disclose in a pilot program? Would it be revenue generated in China? Would it be, you mentioned the contingency plans they have?
Yeah, my view is if they have a certain level of exposure to China, that they should say, here are our contingency plans in the event that we were to have an abrupt decoupling. This is what we've thought about. And these are the risks. I think investors know they exist, but that dialogue is a good dialogue to have. Yeah.
And then Ms. Stevenson-Yang is unfair in the remaining 23 seconds I have. To go back to the VIE issue, just in simplest terms, what does one own when one owns a VIE? And what shareholder protections does one have?
One owns a stream of revenue, not profit, because profit is explicitly not permitted under Chinese law. And what protections does one have? companies arrange that the owners of the VIEs sign documents that allow them to, that allow investors to kick them out if need be. But it's a fairly thin reed to hang on.